On October 16, 1912, a major league outfielder settled under an easy fly ball, raised his glove, and let it fall to the grass. That single dropped ball would follow him all the way into his obituary, 62 years later. His name was Fred Snodgrass, 24 years old. The center fielder for the New York Giants, and one of the surest defensive outfielders in the game. On a cold, gray afternoon at Fenway Park in Boston, he stood 1 out away from a World Series championship. He would never get closer. To understand how one drop could swallow a man's whole life, you have to understand the series it happened in. Because the 1912 World Series was already the strangest ever played. The New York Giants, managed by the fierce and brilliant John McGraw, had run away with the National League. Waiting for them were the Boston Red Sox, a juggernaut led by a 22-year-old named Smokey Joe Wood, who had won 34 games that season with a fastball hitters swore they could hear but not see. The two teams beat each other to a standstill. They split the early games. And then, in Game 2, something happened that had never decided a championship before. The game ran to 11 innings, tied, 6-6, and the umpires called it on account of darkness. A tie. It counted for nothing. It forced the series to stretch to an 8th game to find a winner no one had planned for. Winner took the title. Loser went home with empty hands. Game 8. Fenway Park. A tie score, 1-1, dragging into extra innings. And on the mound for New York stood Christy Mathewson. You have to know who Mathewson was. He was the most famous pitcher alive, a college-educated gentleman in a sport of brawlers and tobacco spitters, a man mothers pointed to and told their sons to become. He had won 300 games. He had thrown 3 shutouts in a single World Series once. But that championship had been years ago, and it haunted him. This game was his last, best chance to win one more. He was 32, and running out of time. Consider what these men were standing in. A World Series share in 1912 could equal a workingman's entire year of wages. This was not just a trophy, it was a fortune, and a name that would outlive them. Everything hung on the next 3 outs. And it hung, in part, on the young man patrolling center field. In the top of the 10th inning, the Giants finally cracked it open. Fred Merkle, himself a man who knew what it was to be blamed, drove in the go-ahead run. New York led, 2-1. 3 outs from glory. Mathewson walked back to the mound to close the door on the greatest afternoon of his life. The first Boston batter, a pinch hitter named Clyde Engel, lifted a soft, lazy fly to center field. Routine. The kind of ball Fred Snodgrass had gathered in 10,000 times without a second thought. He drifted under it. He raised his glove. And the ball struck the leather, and dropped straight to the ground. The runner pulled into second base. And a championship began to unravel, one thread at a time. Here is what almost no one remembers about that inning. On the very next play, Snodgrass sprinted a long way into the gap and made a spectacular running catch, one of the finest of the entire series, stealing a sure hit away from Boston. The same man who had just muffed an easy ball turned around and made a brutally hard one look simple. For one moment, it seemed he might escape his own mistake entirely. Then the game turned, on someone else's hands. Mathewson, shaken, walked the next batter to put two men on. And up to the plate stepped Tris Speaker, one of the greatest hitters who ever lived, a future Hall of Famer with a lifetime average few men have ever touched. Speaker swung and lofted a harmless little pop foul near first base. An easy out. The kind of soft, catchable ball that quietly ends ball games. Three Giants drifted toward it, the pitcher Mathewson, first baseman Fred Merkle, and catcher Chief Myers. And each of them waited for another to call for it. Nobody did. The ball dropped untouched into the dirt between three big league gloves. By some accounts, Speaker turned and warned the Giants they had just thrown the game away. He was right. Handed a second life, Speaker laced a single that tied the score. Then Larry Gardner lifted a long, deep fly, far enough to bring the winning run trotting home. Final, Boston 3, New York 2. The Red Sox were champions of the world. Fenway erupted. Boston poured onto the field. And somewhere in the noise, a 24-year-old outfielder walked off the grass carrying something he would never be able to set down. Christy Mathewson, the greatest pitcher of his age, walked off having lost his last World Series. He would never win one. He would be dead of tuberculosis inside of 13 years. But in the losing clubhouse that afternoon, grief went looking for a single name to pin itself to. And the newspapers handed it one before the sun had even set. Not the walk. Not the foul pop that three men let fall. One play. One man. They called it the $30,000 muff, $30,000 being the difference between the winners and losers' shares, and they hung the whole sum around one player's neck. Fred Snodgrass had become the man who lost the World Series. But look closely at that inning, and the accusation falls apart in your hands. The drop did not lose the game. It put a runner on second base with a two-run lead still intact, and Snodgrass himself erased the very next threat with a brilliant catch. What actually cost the New York Giants the championship was the foul pop that three men, Mathewson among them, let fall into the dirt. That was the true reprieve. That was the play that turned a title into a defeat. Mathewson knew it. His teammates knew it. Even the sports writers, in their more honest moments, admitted the weight had landed on the wrong man. But history has no patience for nuance. History wants a single villain and a simple story. And a fly ball dropping out of a glove is the simplest, most damning picture there is. So the label stuck. It followed Snodgrass out of the game and into every year of the long life that came after. And it was a good life. He left baseball a few seasons later, went home to California, and became a prosperous rancher and banker. He was elected mayor of Oxnard. He raised a family. He lived into his 80s, respected and comfortable, by every honest measure, a man who had won far, far more than he had ever lost. None of it protected him. For more than half a century, strangers still walked up to Fred Snodgrass to ask about the drop. Late in his life, he told the writer Lawrence Ritter that hardly a day went by without someone bringing it up. He answered them politely. And he would say, plainly, that he had been blamed for a game he did not lose by himself. Then, on April 5, 1974, Fred Snodgrass died at the age of 86. And the following day, the New York Times, the paper of record, the finest newspaper in America, ran his obituary beneath a headline he could never, in life or death, escape. Fred Snodgrass, 86, dead, ball player muffed 1912 fly. A rancher. A banker. A mayor. A husband and a father. 62 years of a life well and fully lived. And the country's greatest newspaper reduced every bit of it to one ball he failed to catch when he was 24 years old. That is why this small, strange moment still matters. Fred Snodgrass was the first. The first man that baseball turned into a permanent scapegoat, a single face to carry a loss that was never his alone. The template was cast right there on the grass at Fenway in 1912. And once cast, it never broke. Decades later it would happen again, and again, to names that still sting to say: a slow ground ball rolling through Bill Buckner's legs, a foul ball tipping off the fingertips of a fan named Steve Bartman. Different men. Different cities. The same merciless machine. 1 second, replayed forever, standing in for the failure of an entire team. Baseball is a game built from 1,000 tiny mistakes, spread across 9 innings and 18 men. But memory refuses to carry 1,000 mistakes. It picks one. It reaches for the easiest picture to hold, a ball hitting a glove and falling out, and it makes one man carry the weight of everyone. We like to believe that greatness is measured fairly, that a career is the sum of all its innings. It isn't. Not in baseball, and maybe not anywhere. The record keeps everything. The memory keeps almost nothing. Snodgrass understood that better than any player who ever lived. He had made the catch and the muff inside the same terrible inning, and the world chose to remember only the muff. He spent the rest of his days as living proof of how cruel the ledger of a game can be, how it will hand you 100 good days and remember only your worst 10 seconds. So here is the question worth sitting with tonight. If you did your job well for years, and then failed just once, in front of everyone, on the biggest stage of your life, which moment would the world choose to carve onto your stone? The 1,000 things you quietly got right, or the one thing you dropped? Follow for more.